What happens when a Hollywood legend, revered for his grit and unyielding principles, steps into a lion's den of smug sarcasm and calculated jabs? Clint Eastwood, the man whose steely gaze could silence a room, walked onto Jimmy Kimmel's stage, not for pleasantries, but to confront a festering wound. The tension was palpable, the air thick with unspoken grudges. Kimmel, with his polished grin and knack for turning serious moments into punchlines, had crossed a line. Months earlier, on his late-night show, he'd mocked Eastwood's latest film, a passion project about a Korean War veteran's struggle with PTSD, calling it a tired rehash of macho nonsense. The jab wasn't just a critique, it was personal, dripping with condescension, questioning Eastwood's relevance in an industry he'd shaped for decades. Clint, now 95, didn't take kindly to being dismissed as a relic. He'd demanded this appearance, not for an interview, but for a reckoning. The studio buzzed with anticipation as Clint strode out, his weathered boots thudding against the polished floor. The audience, expecting the usual light-hearted banter, fell silent. Kimmel leaned back in his chair, smirking, ready to play the affable host. Clint Eastwood, everybody. Legend, icon, still kicking at, what, 100? The crowd laughed, but Clint's jaw tightened. He sat, his posture rigid, eyes locked on Kimmel like a gunslinger sizing up an opponent. You got a problem with my work, Jimmy? Clint's voice was low, gravelly, cutting through the forced cheer. Kimmel, unfazed, chuckled. Oh, come on, Clint. It's just comedy. You know, poking fun at the tough guy routine? The audience tittered nervously, sensing the edge in Clint's stare. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near growl. You don't poke fun at men who bled for this country. You don't mock their pain for a cheap laugh. Kimmel's smirk faltered, but he doubled down, his tone sharp. Look, Clint, it's 2025. Maybe the world's moved past your kind of stories. Ever think about that? The audience gasped, the jab landing like a slap. Clint's knuckles whitened as he gripped the armrests. Moved past? You think you get to decide what matters, sitting there in your fancy suit, making a living off other people's work? The crowd murmured, some cheering Clint's defiance, others shocked at the raw hostility. Kimmel, sensing the shift, tried to pivot. Hey, I respect you, Clint, but my job's to call it like I see it. Your film's just dated. Clint's eyes narrowed. Dated? I tell stories about real people, real pain. You tell jokes to sell ads. Tell me, Jimmy, what's the last thing you made that meant something? The air crackled with tension. Kimmel's face reddened, his casual demeanor crumbling under Clint's unrelenting stare. He leaned forward, pointing a finger. You don't get to come on my show and lecture me, old man. I've got an audience to entertain, and they don't want your preachy war stories. Clint shot to his feet, his voice booming. You don't respect your audience. You feed 'em garbage and call it wit. I'm here because you crossed a line, and I'm not leaving till you own it. The crowd erupted, some chanting Clint's name, others stunned into silence. Kimmel, caught off guard, scrambled to regain control. All right, tough guy. You want to fight? Let's do this. He gestured to the stage, as if inviting a brawl, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. Clint didn't flinch, stepping closer, his presence towering despite his age. I don't need a fight to make you look small, Jimmy. The confrontation hung on a knife's edge. The audience riveted, sensing this was no scripted spat. Clint's words carried the weight of a man who'd lived through wars, both on screen and in life, while Kimmel's bravado seemed hollow, a performer out of his depth. The stage was set for a clash that would ripple far beyond the studio, a battle of values, legacy, and raw conviction. Would Kimmel back down, or would his ego push this showdown to a breaking point? The crowd's roar faded to a tense hum as Clint Eastwood stood inches from Jimmy Kimmel, his weathered face a mask of controlled fury. Kimmel, still seated, tried to reclaim the upper hand, his voice sharp but unsteady. You think you can intimidate me on my own stage, Clint? This isn't one of your westerns." The audience held its breath, sensing the shift from verbal sparring to something rawer. Clint's eyes, unyielding, bored into Kimmel. "I don't intimidate, Jimmy. I speak truth. You trashed a story about men who fought, bled, died. Men you'll never understand. And you did it for claps like a trained dog." The crowd gasped, some cheering Clint's boldness, others stunned by the venom in his words. Kimmel's jaw clenched, his usual charm replaced by a flash of anger. "You're out of touch, Eastwood. Nobody cares about your dusty old war tales. My audience wants fresh, not some sermon from a guy who's been coasting on Dirty Harry for 50 years. Clint stepped closer, his voice a low rumble, each word deliberate. "Coasting? I've told stories that outlast your cheap gags. You mock what you can't comprehend because it's easier than facing your own shallowness." The audience erupted, some shouting support for Clint, others egging Kimmel on. The host, visibly rattled, stood to meet Clint's gaze, his finger jabbing the air. "You don't get to waltz in here and play the wise old sage. This is my show, my rules. You don't like my jokes? Leave." Clint didn't budge, his stance solid as granite. "I'm not here for your permission, Jimmy. I'm here because you spat on something sacred and thought you'd get away with it." The crowd's noise swelled, a mix of cheers and jeers, the atmosphere electric with hostility. Kimmel, sensing the audience slipping, tried a different tack, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, please, Clint. You're not some noble crusader. You're just mad your movie flopped, and I called it out. Maybe if you made something worth watching, we wouldn't be here." The jab cut deep, and Clint's hands balled into fists, his voice rising. "Flopped? That film gave voice to men forgotten by people like you. People who'd rather laugh than feel. You wouldn't know courage if it slapped you." The crowd roared, fully invested, some standing, phones out, capturing every second of the clash. Kimmel's face twisted, his composure cracking. "Courage? You're lecturing me about courage? I face millions every night, while you hide behind your camera, playing pretend hero." Clint's laugh was cold, cutting. "Hide? I've lived. More truth in one day than you'll ever know. You face cameras, not life. You wouldn't last a minute in the world those veterans fought for." The audience was on its feet now, the energy chaotic, as if the room itself might combust. Kimmel, desperate to regain control, leaned in, his voice venomous. "You're a fossil, Clint. Your time's done. Step aside before you embarrass yourself. More." The insult landed like a spark in dry grass, and Clint's response was swift, his words a blade. "Embarrass myself? You're the one peddling cheap shots to a room full of people who deserve better. Look at 'em, Jimmy. They're not laughing now." The standoff reached a fever pitch, the two men locked in a battle of wills, neither willing to yield. Kimmel's eyes darted to the audience, realizing his usual tricks weren't working. Clint's presence, raw and unfiltered, commanded the room, his every word a challenge to Kimmel's flimsy authority. The host, cornered, tried one last jab. "You want respect? Earn it. Make something people care about, not another tired war. Flick." Clint's gaze didn't waver, his voice steady but searing. "I don't need your approval, Jimmy. I make films for people who value truth, not for clowns chasing ratings." The crowd exploded, the divide clear. Some saw Clint as a hero defending honor. Others wanted Kimmel to fight back. The stage was a powder keg, and the next move would either defuse it or blow it wide open. Clint Eastwood towered over the stage, his presence a storm cloud swallowing Jimmy Kimmel's usual swagger. The audience, now a sea of raised voices and waving phones, fed off the raw energy of the clash. Kimmel, his face flushed with a mix of rage and desperation, paced a tight circle trying to wrest back control. "You think you're some moral giant, Clint? You're just a guy who got lucky playing cowboys. This," he gestured wildly at the crowd, "this is real. This is what people want. not your preachy, outdated movies. His voice cracked with defiance, but the tremor in his hands betrayed him. Clint, unmoved, crossed his arms, his stare unrelenting. Real? You call this circus real? You're a vulture, Jimmy, picking at people's lives for a quick buck. That's not a show. It's a scam. The crowd's reaction split the room. Half roared for Clint, their cheers a wave of support for the man who'd defined grit, while others booed, loyal to Kimmel's biting humor. A man in the front row shouted, "Tell him, Clint," while another yelled, "Get over it, old man." The chaos fueled the tension, and Kimmel seized it, his voice rising to a snarl. "You want to talk scams? How about you milking the same tough guy act for decades? You're not fooling anyone, Eastwood. Your films are relics, just like you." The insult was a gut punch, meant to wound, and for a moment Clint's eyes flickered with something deeper than anger. Betrayal, perhaps, at an industry he'd helped build now turning its back. But Clint didn't falter. He stepped forward, closing the gap between them, his voice steady but laced with fire. "Relics? I tell stories that last. You churn out noise that's gone by morning. You mocked a film about men who carried scars so people like you could sleep safe. That's not a joke. That's a disgrace." The audience erupted again, some clapping fiercely, others heckling. The room a battlefield of loyalties. Kimmel, cornered, threw his hands up, his sarcasm now a weapon. "Oh, spare me," the hero speech. "You're not saving the world, Clint. You're just mad I told the truth. Your movie's a snooze, and nobody cares." The words hung heavy, and for a split second the crowd quieted, waiting for Clint's response. His face hardened, but his voice dropped, calm yet lethal. "Nobody cares? I got letters from veterans, families, people who saw themselves in that film. They thanked me for giving them a voice. What do you get, Jimmy? Ratings? A pat on the back from suits who don't know your name?" The crowd's roar surged, the weight of Clint's words landing like a hammer. Kimmel's eyes widened, his bravado crumbling under the truth. He jabbed a finger at Clint, his voice shrill. "Don't act like you're above this. You're here, on my stage, because you need the spotlight. You're nothing without it." Clint's laugh was sharp, cutting through the noise. "Need it? I've got nothing to prove to you or your crowd. I'm here because you crossed a line, and I'm not letting you hide behind your desk." He leaned in, his voice a low growl. "You want to talk truth? Try looking in the mirror. You're not a host. You're a bully with a microphone." The audience was on its feet, the energy chaotic, some chanting Clint's name, others shouting, for Kimmel to fight back. A producer hovered nervously off stage, unsure whether to cut to commercial or let the fire burn. Kimmel, his face a mask of fury, stepped closer, his voice dripping with venom. "You're done, Eastwood. This is my world now. Get out before you make a fool of yourself." The challenge hung in the air, a dare neither man would back down from. Clint's eyes never left Kimmel's, his silence louder than any shout. The crowd, sensing a breaking point, leaned in, their anticipation a living thing. This wasn't just a spat. It was a clash of eras, of values, of men who stood for something or nothing at all. The next moment would decide who walked away with their head high and who crumbled under the weight of their own words. The stage vibrated with the crowd's fervor. A roaring tide of voices split between Clint Eastwood's unyielding resolve and Jimmy Kimmel's desperate defiance. Kimmel, his face twisted with rage, stood toe-to-toe with Clint, his voice a jagged edge. "You think you can shame me on my own turf, Eastwood? You're a has-been throwing a tantrum because the world passed you by." The audience gasped, some jeering, others cheering, the room a cauldron of raw emotion. Clint's eyes, sharp as flint, held Kimmel's without a flicker. "Passed me by? I'm still standing, telling stories that matter. You're the one running out of steam, Jimmy, hiding behind cruel jokes because you've got nothing real to say." His words were a blade, cutting through the noise, and the crowd's roar surged, many now chanting Clint's name, their loyalty shifting. Kimmel's hands shook as he pointed at Clint, his voice cracking with fury. Nothing real? I've got millions watching me every night. You? You're preaching to empty theaters. Nobody cares about your sob stories anymore. The jab was meant to sting, but Clint's face remained stone, his voice calm yet searing. Empty? Those theaters are full of people who know sacrifice, who know pain. You wouldn't understand that, Jimmy. You've never stood for anything but yourself. The audience erupted, the tide turning fully, their cheers for Clint drowning out the scattered boos. A woman in the back shouted, "You tell him, Clint," while others nodded, gripped by his conviction. Kimmel, sensing the room slipping away, tried one last gambit, his tone venomous. "You're pathetic, coming here to lecture me. This is my stage, my show. Get out, or I'll have you thrown out." The threat hung heavy, but Clint didn't flinch, stepping so close their faces nearly touched. "Throw me out? You don't have the guts. You're a coward who picks on the weak because it's easy. I'm here for the men you mocked, for the stories you trashed. You don't get to walk away clean." His voice carried a weight that silenced the room, each word a hammer striking Kimmel's crumbling facade. The crowd was electric, hanging on Clint's every syllable, their phones capturing a moment that felt historic. Kimmel's eyes darted to the audience, then back to Clint, his bravado gone, replaced by a flicker of panic. "You're wrong," he stammered, but the words lacked force, swallowed by the crowd's growing chant of, "Clint! Clint!" Clint raised a hand, quieting them, his voice steady but fierce. "I came here to set things right. You mocked heroes for a laugh, but you're the one who looks small now. These people see it. They know who's real." He turned to the audience, his gaze sweeping the room, and they roared back, their support a tidal wave. Kimmel, deflated, sank into his chair, his hands gripping the desk as if to anchor himself. "You win, Eastwood," he muttered, barely audible. "Just go." Clint shook his head, his voice softer now, but no less commanding. "I'm not here to win, Jimmy. I'm here for respect. Respect you never gave. You owe it to those veterans, to the people who trusted you with this stage. Start earning it." He turned, not to leave, but to face the audience directly, his presence filling the room. "This isn't about me, it's about them, the men and women who deserve better than cheap shots." The crowd rose to its feet, their applause thunderous, a tribute to a man who'd stood his ground and won not just a fight, but a principle. Kimmel, silent, stared at the desk, his defeat plain for all to see. Clint walked off, head high, leaving behind a stage forever changed and an audience forever moved.